Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co host and dear friend, Jake LeQuire. And today, some pretty substantial news came down the pipeline in terms of NFL contracts. A division rival, Bijan Robinson with the Atlanta Falcons, got an extension that goes up to I think about $75 million over the next 3 years. So paid roughly about $25 million per year, gets almost $51 million of that fully guaranteed right out of the gate. And then Zay Flowers with the Baltimore Ravens, a wide receiver they drafted in the first round a few years back. He just got an extension where it was around $140 million over 4 years. So he's getting paid annually about $35 million per year. Jacob, I think both of us can agree that Bijan Robinson is a better running back than Zay Flowers is a wide receiver, but this is a pretty stark contrast. And I think is a pretty telltale sign of the premium versus non-premium position discussion.
For sure. Bijan's the highest paid running back ever now, or this is the highest paid running back contract ever handed out. And it's just under half of what Zay Flowers is making, or is going to make for the next 4 years. 6 years. It's a 4 year extension on top of the 2 years that he has left. The thing that stuck out to me were the guarantees of the Zay Flowers deal, because stacked up against some of the players like Jackson Smith and Jigba, who received an extension earlier this year, Jamar Chase last year, CeeDee Lamb last year, and Justin Jefferson 2 years ago, the guaranteed number that Zay Flowers is going to get is going to be higher than all those guys. Now, Zay Flowers is the latest guy to receive his deal, so you may expect the guaranteed numbers to be higher, or the reported guarantees to be higher. We haven't gotten the full details yet, but it is a little bit crazy that he's slated to make 108 million guaranteed on this extension, compared to some of the other guys who signed earlier this year, like Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I think is at 78 guaranteed. Chris Olave signed last week, I believe, a similar deal in terms of total money, but the guarantees were only 90 million, which he's had concussion issues, but still, I think the high guarantees is what stood out to me about Zay Flowers. But that's just the market nowadays, right? If T Mac continues to keep balling for the next 2 years, we are going to have to pay a lot more than this for McMillan. But it's just an interesting number that I thought came down the pipeline this morning.
It's fascinating because from a numbers standpoint, it's very much like the Justin Jefferson deal a few years back. When you account for inflation, when this deal is really going to kick in the next 2 years, and maybe some of that guaranteed money being part of the guaranteed money that's part of his rookie contract, I wonder how much of this is just simply like this was top of the market. We know this is going to keep you around the top 10, top 15 highest paid wide receivers at your position, which is what they feel like is what his value is. To where I think it's justified from Baltimore's standpoint. For me, it's the fact that Bijan Robinson was a top 10 pick, and I think Zay Flowers was taken around like pick 20, pick 21. So you see a discrepancy there within the first round where I think you get more rookie surplus sometimes from other positions than you do the non-premium. And talking about Bijan Robinson's teammates, Drake London, he got a similar deal. I think it was around $141 million over 4 years. A guaranteed structure is probably a little bit different. Again, favors Zay Flowers. But then Kyle Pitts, he gets a $54 million contract over 3 years, and he was a top 5 pick. So again, when you approach the draft, considering premium versus non-premium positions is huge, especially in the first round. And I think these contract extensions just echo that.
You got to think too about the history of the Baltimore Ravens receiver corps. They kind of stink when it comes to drafting early receivers, and Zay Flowers has really been their best hit in the last 2 decades, maybe, like going all the way back to like Jacoby Jones, but he wasn't a
Yep.
first round pick. I think he was a third round pick, if I'm not mistaken. So uh, you have to hold on to Zay Flowers. He's been a
It's like
Pro
what
Bowler
Torrey
the last few
Smith and
years.
Hollywood
Torrey
Brown, I
Smith,
think, would be like the two best wide receivers I think they've drafted. And I mean, they're
right,
good, but I don't think they're in the Zay Flowers conversation in terms of like route running and effectiveness.
right. So when you have somebody, he's a back to back Pro Bowler, and you have somebody that is that effective, you kind of have to hold on to him, especially if it's a position that your staff or your team hasn't had a good history of adding early in the draft. So it, for Ravens fans, you should like the deal because Zay Flowers is a good player. It's just the guaranteed numbers were quite not alarming, but they stood out because they are currently the highest for a wide receiver in today's NFL.
They are, and the that market, the edge market, they're only going to keep growing as the salary cap increases. And like you said, from a Panthers perspective, it's paying a guy like Tedero McMillan in a few years, and he is going to get top of the line dollar if he stays healthy and he keeps producing the way he's been producing since his rookie year. Going into this week, we have the first preseason game. Get the kickoff the NFL as we approach the regular season, and the Carolina Panthers will be playing the Arizona Cardinals in Canton, Ohio. These two teams have met a bunch of times. 2008, obviously, they met twice, beat them in the regular season in Charlotte. Then they beat us in the playoffs. We went back and forth with them in the 2010s. Probably the most memorable revenge game was the 2015 NFC Championship game, where the Panthers beat the Arizona Cardinals to advance to Super Bowl 50. This rivalry has gone back and forth. I think the reason why these two teams are in it is Luke Kuechly and Larry Fitzgerald are both Hall of Famers. Is there anything that you take away from these two teams being in it? Obviously, I think the rivalry that had kind of start the build over the late 2000s, early 2010s has kind of dissipated. But do you think that there's any history that could continue to be made between these two franchises in terms of a rivalry?
Maybe once they get an established quarterback in there, and I don't want to speak too soon. Carson Beck is starting, so maybe he takes that role for him this year. I wouldn't count on it, but it could always happen, right? We've seen quarterbacks from later rounds establish themselves as starters. I think it's neat that the Panthers are back in the Hall of Fame game for the first time since I believe the team's first season when we played against the Jaguars. It was also the Jaguars' first season in that inaugural game for each franchise. This is the first time back, and mainly it's because Luke Kuechly. We had Julius Peppers make the Hall of Fame before this, but Luke Kuechly is the first drafted and only play in Carolina player to make the Hall of Fame. Should have been the youngest Hall of Famer ever, but the voters didn't want Gale Sayers' record to get taken away, so they gave Luke a year before he had to earn his stripes. Uh, Similar with Belichick, I think they're giving him a year to earn his
I
stripes too.
don't get how you take away from, in my opinion, all time greats, because like when you mention Luke Kuechly, you're mentioning Brian Urlacher, Patrick Willis, Ray Lewis, like all time greats. When you mention Bill Belichick, you're mentioning Don Shula, a contemporary, and Andy Reid. Like I just don't understand the voting from that perspective. And if you've already made other candidates wait a couple years, what's one more for them as opposed to one of these players or coaches that should be first ballot?
Exactly, and a cool note is I think Drew Brees. This is his first year available, and he made the Hall of Fame, right? But the Panthers have the Hall of Fame game and not the Saints, so I'll be happy about that. In terms
Tyler
of
Shuck versus Carson Beck would be fun to watch. I think I would enjoy, hate watching that game for sure.
they for sure wouldn't play Shuck. I don't think. Maybe
It'd be
Rattler,
Rattler, but
but
you
yeah,
never know. You get a series or two. He throws a bad
that's
pass, and
true.
you talk about it for a week or two. You know,
Yeah, that would have been a fun hate watch, but fortunately, the Panthers play in this game. And as far as things I want to see and what I'm looking to see, Kenny Pickett's going to start this game. None of the starters are going to play, so Bryce, T Mac, Chuba, all the guys are going to be out. But I want to see some Matt Haynes King. Will Greer, who was QB3 on the depth chart, retired a couple weeks ago. And so now Haynes King is that QB3. I want to see how he's learned the system, what he can do as a passer. Because if you watched any of his stuff at Georgia Tech, you know how effective he was in scrambles or QB powers, stuff like that. Kind of like a mini Cam Newton from Auburn, a little bit of carryover there. But I want to see what Haynes King is able to do once Kenny Pickett gets out of there after his first two or three series, because we haven't had a young QB3 in a while that's been fun to watch. Frankly, we haven't had a backup QB that's been fun to watch since the Joe Webb days, who was an absolute demon in the preseason. So if Haynes King can have some more fun plays like that, that's something I'm looking forward to.
That's how you keep the fan base engaged over the next month, is to have that fun third string player who's a fringe like practice squad roster spot kind of guy. And I think Haynes King has the ability to bring that excitement, especially in August for this team. You kind of mentioned a few other like wrinkles to this with some of the wide receiver injuries. It'll be interesting to see Jasim Reed, Bryson Tremaine, and John Mechie step up and see if they can fill a role that we were hoping Chris Brazel would have. And then the other one that kind of keep a concern about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more with injuries, Xavier Legette, he's okay, cleared the concussion protocol. But one of those instances where you start to feel a little thin at the wide receiver position when that felt like one of our deeper positions going into this offseason.
For sure, Jasim Reed is a name that all the beat writers have been talking about throughout training camp, and I'm looking forward to see what he can do, what kind of plays he can make, because the Panthers still lack the juice, like the explosive ability in the receiver room, and if they can have that out of somebody like Reed, he can be like the next Jalen Coker, maybe. I don't know if he have the success that Coker had, but a back end receiver that's able to contribute in special ways. The offensive line rotation I think is important as well. And on that note about the offensive line, this just came down the pipeline, the Twitter sphere. Darnell Wright from the Bears, their right tackle. We were talking about extensions. He just got extended to, I believe it's $116 million over 4 years, with 93 million guaranteed. So just goes to show you the guarantee structure and the money is a lot different for a tackle as opposed to a running back. Bijan Robinson, we can agree, is a better running back than Wright as a tackle, but the Bears' offensive line was important last year. They already lost their center, so they lock up their young right tackle for the long term.
I see what you did there with the right tackle there at the end, kind of stretching out the
Yeah,
right portion. But my question to you is this, and it's not because I think Bijan has solidified himself at very least top three at his position.
for
His
sure.
play has showed that. Darnell Wright was an all pro this past year. And I don't want to take anything away from him. I think it was a very clear distinction that like Zay Flowers is definitely like one of those where if he was like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, he's like the 1B that Devontae Smith was for AJ Brown for a few years. I don't necessarily see that like that same drop off with a guy like Darnell Wright. To me, he does give like top three at his position and at the very least top five. So I don't know about the disparity there. I think it just more goes to show that tackle is a premium position and running back is a non-premium.
For sure. Yeah, I have to agree with that. Top 3 to 5 right tackle, perhaps.
Yeah, and that is
Tackle
just
overall,
plain.
like
Yeah,
yeah, like we're pushing closer to that 10 spot. But he was also a top 10 pick, like we're talking about with Bijan, and Drake London was also top 10, right? Chris Olave was number 12, I think. So that higher draft pedigree matters as well. But back to the Panthers, obviously Monroe Freeling, Rasheed Walker, they're not going to play. They're the starting tackles. I want to see what Brady Christensen can give as a rotational lineman. I want to see the guard depth because I brought that up last week. That's the thing I'm most afraid of is how are the guards going to look because Rob Hunt, he started practicing again, but he missed time last year. Damian Lewis misses chunks of every training camp. What can Sadiq Charles and Brady Christensen and if Sam Hecht plays a little bit of guard, what can they all give us in this game against the Cardinals? I don't know if they're going to play their starters, but their defensive front has added a lot of reinforcements over the last couple of years. So should be an interesting test for the backups.
and I really want to see Sam Hecht in a role where
Yeah,
he's playing guard because Brady Christensen, he's been able to play a few games, but he always deals with what feels like a nagging injury of some sort. So to have more depth at that guard position, especially if Luke Fortner is good to go, if he's somebody that can hit the ground running, and you kind of do what the Patriots did. I'm blinking out. He came out of Georgia, and I feel really bad about not remembering his name, but it's because I think Gabe Jackas has been more the talk of the town with Patriots discourse. But they drafted a guy out of Georgia. He played guard last year, and now he's moving back to center. And so I think it's one of those situations with Sam Hecht. You can do that rotation where obviously he plays more naturally at center, and you can slide him over. Maybe not this year, but next year he can still provide depth. Because again, I think you made a great point. Like with the Cardinals, they've kind of bolstered the interior of their defensive line. You have guys like Darius Robinson and Walter Nolan that have been first round picks. They've added Roy Lopez and Andrew Billings this offseason to have more depth at nose tackle. And so playing against true professionals, guys that aren't just Joe Schmoes, I think will really test some of these younger guys and see if they're able to hold up in the run game and the pass game.
The Patriots center you're talking about, Jared Wilson from
Yes.
Georgia. Yeah, who
Yep.
he played guard last year. They signed Elijah Vera Tucker so they can move him back to center, which is his natural position. I believe Garrett Bradbury was the
They
center there
traded to the
last year.
Bears. Yeah. And they
Yes,
traded him.
yes, to Chicago, who goes back to the point. They just signed Darnell Wright. Uh, Highest guarantee ever for an offensive lineman, by the way, 93 million for him.
Wow. Okay.
It's important. You got to protect your quarterback. Another thing on the other side of the ball, I want to see the defensive line and edge rotation. The Panthers put out their depth chart for this game. You know, depth charts are in flux throughout the season, throughout even especially throughout training camp and preseason. But the starters that were named for the defensive line group were Derek Brown and Bobby Brown, obviously, but Cam Jackson, the fifth round pick from last year's draft, was named the starter at nose tackle. So if he doesn't play, I really need to see what Lee Hunter is bringing to the table because I would have thought that Lee Hunter had a good chance to be an early starter. But if Cam Jackson is really impressed in training camp, we need to see what Lee Hunter is able to do in his first NFL game or preseason game.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if he's like able to move up the depth chart as preseason goes on, as kind of like this training camp, because training camp technically ends. Is it like the first week of preseason and then it just turns into
No,
practices, or is it like
it
training
keeps
camp
going
goes until the
throughout.
final? Yeah,
Right.
that's why I was trying to remember how it was like viewed in terms of like weeks. If it was like it now just goes to the practices, but I think yeah, that is after you get down to your final 53. But seeing the progression from Lee Hunter, it is interesting. You invest a second round pick, so you're expecting almost like a day one starter or somebody that's going to be a rotational piece. And for a fifth round pick, a guy that you're throwing a dart at, is a guy that's vying with the ones. I think is just a testament to Cam Jackson. We knew he was a behemoth of an individual coming out of Florida. And I think now that he's learning like leverage techniques and he's getting like a little bit lower in a pad level. I mean, this is a guy that's like 6'5". And so when you're that big, you got to be able to get lower than the person across from you. And it seems like he's starting to do that. He had a crazy rep against Sam Heck today where he just pushed him pretty much back into the quarterback. And Mike Kay has talked about like this has been his offseason. And so if we don't get immediate production out of Lee Hunter, he's still kind of transitioning from college to the pros. This is what you want to see from your year two players. It looks like T Mac. It's picking up where he left off. And if he can just continue the transcendence, you want those guys that you've drafted and you're developing to show that development. And that is what Cam Jackson has shown this offseason.
And it's a good problem to have if those two are competing for a significant role because it means you have two good players there at a position that needs it. Because Turk Wharton, we don't know when he's going to be back. Bobby Brown just came back off of the non-football injury list, and he's practicing, which is good. But you always need a lot of like help on both offensive and defensive lines. I want to see some Aaron Hall as well, the undrafted rookie from Duke that we talked about last week, who I think my take was that he would find his way onto the team. I want to see what he's able to bring because he most certainly will get some like quite a few reps in this game if the starters aren't playing. I think LeBrian Ray is kind of the guy in front of him there, the guy who's been with Carolina for the past couple of years as that sixth defensive lineman. So if Hall's going to make any headway on the depth chart, it would be beating out LeBrian Ray. Another thing is the edge rotation. If Jalen Phillips and I would assume Pat Jones are the guys that who won't play, who are both veterans in this league, what can Prensley give us if he's playing? What can some of the guys like Travis Gibson and Cam Gill, who the Panthers signed uh, in the wake of the Nick Squirton injury? Cam Gill, who was the UFL Defensive Player of the Year in this past season, what can he give us? I know he's had some stints with the Panthers before in the offseason, but maybe coming off of a defensive player of the year in a different league, maybe that can give him a boost to some playing time or showing out in the preseason here for the Panthers.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a name that I think is really pivotal this year with Nick Scorton going down. It's Prince Uman. And you've heard it from a lot of the people on the roster. Like we bring in Jalen Phillips, the premier pass rusher. And he goes like, no, this guy's a real deal on pass downs. It's like we got to see it. We got just show me getting around the edge, beating the guy that's blocking you, and forcing Carson Beck or whoever's playing quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals into a bad decision or have to throw the ball away. Like that's what you want to see from some of these players, especially if they're going to be playing some backups, is you want to see them dominating those reps so you feel comfortable, hey, come the regular season and Princey Uman like lining up against like at least an average tackle that he's able to beat him around the edge and make him pay. And that's what you want to see. And he did that at Ole Miss. And I want to continue seeing that from a player that he's a cool guy to have in the fan base. He's active on Twitter. He is a true keep pounding member, and I only want to see great things for a guy like that.
Oh, I don't know if you saw his presser the other day, but Princely said he's trying to step away from social media, which, I'm
Hey,
cool with
focus
that.
on your focus
Yeah,
and keep the main thing the main thing. I'm saying the fact that he was active in that way just shows he cares. And I get he thinks he's probably doing too much now, and that's fine. If that makes you a better athlete, that makes you a better athlete.
for sure. You can't go wrong with focusing on the game, or giving the game more focus, which I like. I guess the last thing in this particular game that we wanted to touch on was, other than Jasim Reed, what does the receiver rotation look like? You imagine Tedero McMillan, Jalen Coker, Xavier Leggett, all three are not going to play. And in the wake of Chris Brazzell being injured, Bryson Tremaine, John Mechie, Jimmy Horn Jr., what can they show off in this game? Because, and in all the preseason games, I think Jimmy Horn has a pretty good chance to show some stuff because he's the speed guy on the Panthers roster. And so if he can get past some of the backup corners who aren't respecting him enough, I think that would do wonders for his ability to make the roster. So on, I was going to say on Sunday, on Thursday, I want to see which receivers are out there catching passes and making a statement from Kenny Pickett and Haynes King.
I know you mentioned Joe Webb earlier, but was it? I want to say this was like the 2013 preseason, and maybe I'm just making something up, but I knew it was a post route, and I thought Joe Webb was throwing it. It might have been was it Anderson? Anderson, what was his first name? The back of the cam for the longest time. His last
Derek
name was Anderson.
Anderson.
Derek Anderson. That's right. I could not remember. I wanted to say like Will, but that's obviously the pass rusher in Houston. But Derek Anderson, it was either him or Joe Webb, and they threw the post route. And I thought it was Ted Ginn who caught it. But like that's what you want to see. You want to see like a dagger in one of these like third quarters where it's like Haynes King is just throwing up the Jimmy Horn and he's just going out and grabbing it and scoring with it. Like that's the kind of momentum you want to start building up in these couple weeks because he's a guy, like you said, like he's that speed element. And if he can get more confident and comfortable playing his role, he's going to be a guy that's going to offer what we were looking for in Chris Brazell as a third round pick. And again, talking about another late round pick in Cam Jackson, like that's what Jimmy Horn is. And so if we can get that development from these year two guys, that will supplant kind of what we drafted this year and thinking that we would get immediate impact from guys like Lee Hunter and Chris Brazell.
The other late guys in that draft, Trevor Etienne, who's probably going to start at running back, and Mitchell Evans, who's probably going to start at tight end in this game. So a lot of contribution from that draft class 2 years ago. Hopefully they all ball out. Do you have any other? Obviously, I hope we win this Hall of Fame game. It doesn't really matter, like the score doesn't. Just don't want to get blown out, and I want to see. Oh, I guess the big one, Brad Idzik, who we talked about last week. He's called, I think, halves of games in the preseason before. This will be the first full game that he has as the main play caller. I'm just looking to not see procedural penalties, like no delayed games and stuff like that. It would make, and we're gonna get some false starts, obviously, because it's a new offensive line, and some of these guys haven't played in the NFL before or played together in the NFL before. But if we can see no delay of game penalties, that would be perfect, in my opinion, because he's not going to show off all the good plays that he has, Idzik that is. But if we can have a smooth game from a managed like game management standpoint, I would love to see that.
Absolutely. No, that's again, it's those little things where it's like you can build upon, and it's not so much about like putting together the perfect game plan. Like that, your game plan should get better as the year goes on. I mean, you see that with Sean McVay, Ben Johnson. They're able to dial in the matchups and how they can just expose different things. Like when you look at like the Bears down the stretch, they would get into like 13 personnel in some games and just stay in it. I like the famous game over in London where the Rams rolled out 13 personnel. They practically lived in that personnel group that entire game. And so Brad Idzik, whether it's personnel groupings, whether it's plays that work, like hammer those buttons until they don't and make a defense pay. Like that's exactly kind of what you want to see. And I again, having a competent play caller, I think is going to be key because that allows Dave Canales to then focus on all the little things between game management and making sure people are in the right headspace as we're going throughout the game. And I think that's going to be critical. I really do think that's going to be critical. Camp battles that I think we can talk about. We've really, I think, harped on the Cam Jackson, Lee Hunter transition. There's Aaron Hall and LeBrian Ray, who are also going to be fighting for roster and depth spots. LeBrian Ray has been a solid contributor. I think he's a guy that you love having as a second, third stringer. I don't think you ever want to see him be like the starter out there. And so the fact that he's still kind of on our team and providing that depth is great. We discussed the cornerback battle a little bit that we want to see a little bit more of probably in this preseason game. And then I think we can really touch on this. We've talked about it a bunch already, but it's really just like those wide receiver spots because Tedero McMillan, Jalen Coker, they're highly drafted guys or guys that just got recently extended that they have nothing to worry about in terms of their roster position outside of just staying healthy and staying on kind of task. With these other guys, who do you think can really step up as that wide receiver three? Is it going to be the incumbent like David Moore, Bryson Tremaine? He was the exclusive rights free agent, similar to Jalen Coker. Were able to retain him. Does he take a step similar to Coker, where he's just the guy that Bryce can trust? John Mechie, former Alabama teammate. Jimmy Horn, we talked about as like, hey, being that speedster that can really stretch a defense. Jasim Reed, he is a guy that Kenny Pickett just came out and said, like, you talk about a guy that has the it factor, he's got it. Like, who's going to be that guy, I think is really going to be the interesting narrative over the next month because we need that wide receiver to step up and give us more versatility between switching from 11 to 12 personnel and ease some of the burden off of Brad Idzik as that play caller.
Well, I think the wide receiver three, at least at first, is going to be Xavier Leggett, just because he's the guy who knows the system. First round pick, he's been there. But for receiver four, five, and six, that's the question, right? David Moore has always been with Dave Canales since they drafted him in Seattle. I think it was 2020 where he was a seventh round pick, maybe 2019. He's been with every Dave Canales team, and he's a vested veteran. He knows the system. He's reliable, and I think he'll end up making the team. What I would do, and this is something that a lot of people have talked about, if I were Carolina, because David Moore's a vested veteran in the league, which means he's played more than 4 seasons in the NFL. If you cut him, he's not subjected to waivers. So if when it's cut day and they have to get down to 53 roster or 53 players on the roster, you could cut David Moore because he's free to re-sign with any team or sign with the Panthers again if he wants. And then once you place guys like Ike Ekwonu on IR, um, Turk Wharton on IR, like season IR and stuff like that, then you free up another spot for him to come back. Like maybe you give him a handshake deal and say, we're going to cut you so that we can keep Aaron Hall and he's not subjected to waivers, or Jasim Reed or Haynes King, maybe like stuff like that. So I think David Moore is going to find his way onto the team, but I think he initially won't survive the for or the I think it's only one cut day now. I don't think it's three anymore like it used to be. I think he will not survive the initial 53, or at least that's what I would try to do. However, last year he did survive the 53, even though they could have done the same thing. So you never know. But Bryson Tremaine, I think, was a good name you brought up. He was getting the wide receiver three looks today. Once Xavier Leggett went down with the stinger, he was the third guy with the starters. So I think they have a lot of trust in Tremaine and what he can bring. Jimmy Horn, we talked about the speed element that outside of Chris Brazzell doesn't exist on the roster, and now you're not going to see that from Chris Brazzell this year. John Mechie and Jasim Reed, I think, are the two vying for that receiver sixth or seventh receiver spot if they keep seven. It's going to be interesting with Jasim Reed. I think you probably would want to keep him if you're afraid that he might get like subjected to waivers and another team might take him, kind of like what we're talking about, letting David Moore go so that you can keep somebody like that. But John Mechie has the familiarity factor, and so I think not only not tomorrow, Thursday's game, and all the games and joint practices are going to be important, but Jasim Reed really has to prove that he is worth keeping, because I think a familiarity factor between Young and Mechie isn't something you can ignore, especially when you're still looking for more contributors outside of T Mac and Jalen Coker.
And Jasim Reed could be one of those players where he balls out in training camp. He has a good preseason, and he's a contributor on the practice squad, and is a guy that gets elevated due to some injuries. And he's a guy that takes a little bit of time to develop into a potential role player, like a guy like David Moore. And so I don't want to take anything away from him. I wish nothing but the best. I only want to see kind of this competitiveness lead to one of these players blossoming into that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 role to allow kind of the rest of that room to kind of fill out. But you really need, I think, another guy to emerge aside from T Mac and Jalen Coker for this wide receiving group. Getting into the injuries and a little bit of drama in the NFC South, Xavier Legette was carted off the field today, like you alluded to. His head hit the turf. Were concerns about kind of, hey, him being concussed. He passes protocol. He should have time to recover before everybody pads up again. Obviously, won't be playing Thursday. But in the NFC South, Jalen Walker feared to have torn his ACL earlier today. Brian Brisset with the Saints, I believe he had a season-ending injury a couple of days ago. Vita Vea, I think we may have discussed this last week when discussing the Bucks. He's requesting a trade. We as a team, the Panthers, have probably had some of the most, like, you talk about big names from guys that have been drafted in the top 100 or higher acquisitions like Nick Scott and Chris Brazell already done for the year. It's concerns about that it's just like the NFC South is already a slugfest. You just wonder, like, if these injuries start to pile up here in the Southeast, like, is this just going to be barren rosters by the time we even hit week 1?
I mean, it's tough. As a Panthers fan, we already know it's tough with our guys being hurt, but the entire division is going through stuff like this, and obviously there are camp injuries every year across the entire league. But I can't remember it ever being this focused, maybe to one division. And if there's a silver lining at all, it's that everyone in the division is going through something, and so there's not really a huge categorical advantage, if you would want to say that. But hopefully, not just the Panthers, especially the Panthers, but hopefully all the teams can get through the preseason period, like, not injury free because it's already happened, but not sustaining any more heavy injuries, because these are all important players that have already gone down. And in the case of the Bucks, it's Vita Vea, their best defender by far, and Baker Mayfield doing a whole song and dance about his contract or lack of a contract extension that he feels is viable in relation to his play on the field. I don't know. I think that $100 million over 2 years is a fair extension for Baker Mayfield, more than fair, I would say, for Baker Mayfield, but he feels differently. And so there's just a ton of drama and not intrigue, but a ton of rough stuff for everybody in the NFC South. And hopefully the Panthers, out of all the teams, are going to be able to get through it into the regular season. The other thing I would say about Jalen Walker in particular is Carolina is going to be facing the Saints and the Bucks. I think the earliest game between those two is week 7. I think that's when we host Tampa Bay, but we go to Atlanta in week 2. So the Panthers and the Falcons, who have sustained probably the most important injuries, are going to be facing off against each other early.
They are. And again, like, I don't want to wish ill on anybody from an injury standpoint. I prefer when teams are at full strength, because it's like we saw you at your best and you saw us at our best. Like, this whole like back and forth, like, you didn't have these players, we didn't have these players. You just excuses sound best to those making them. And at this point, it is a depth concern for some of these positions. Like, we went into the offseason, I already said it earlier today, but like the wide receiver room felt like a strength for us. The edge room felt like a strength for us. And it's like we've already had a couple of injuries where it's like one or two more, and it's like you don't feel good about this position group. And so it's just making sure everybody stays healthy. We're a little bit more cognitive with some of these injuries. Like, if we have a situation with a wide receiver where their knee isn't feeling 100%. Keep them sidelined for a few days. There's no rush here. Like at this point, I think everybody has shown that they're up to the right conditioning standards. It's about making sure that we have these guys healthy. And especially when you consider that we have an early bye week, I think we need to lean into that where it's like, don't rush people. If anybody has kind of some of these lingering issues, let them get better so that we can play as a healthy unit down the stretch, because that is usually what helps you like take you over the top. Like if we want to make a playoff run, we want to win a playoff game, we need to stay healthy in order to do that. Otherwise, we don't have the depth that some of these other teams have across the league to kind of stay afloat.
For sure. If you can imagine, let's just say the Panthers make it all the way to the Super Bowl and the team isn't the 1 seed, I think that would be 17 straight weeks of, or 16 straight weeks of football, like games before the Super Bowl break. So you got to use that week 5 bye week as best you can, because it's only going to get tougher from there. And like the tough part of the schedule is right after that bye week. So we'll talk more about that as we get closer to the season. I think we're in takes territory now. And to kick off our takes, I will say that from every account that I've seen, Jasim Reed is somebody that the Panthers adore, like the brass, the coaching staff in the front office, the players adore. You talked about how glowingly Kenny Pickett was speaking of him today in his press conference, and all the beat writers adore, because there are no fans at training camp as they renovate the training facility. It's only the people covering the team, and all of them seem to be enamored with what Jasim Reed could be. My take is that he's going to find his way onto the 53. It may not be after the first cuts, but maybe like they did with Jalen Coker, geez, almost 3 years ago now. He didn't make the initial 53. He went to the practice squad. Luckily, didn't get scooped up by another team. And by I think week 4 or 5, I think he was elevated to the main team because, or it might have been after they traded Deontay Johnson or Mingo, but he found his way onto the main squad, broke out in that Broncos game where he caught his first career touchdown, and then really took off from there. And now he got his payday. I think Jasim Reed is going to find his way onto the Panthers in a similar manner, whether it's surviving the cut day or getting cut but making it back at some point in the season.
I like that take. Again, this is a player that I think deserves it. When we talk about undrafted free agents, we've had a few of those players, Corey Thornton, Jalen Coker, make it to the final 53. Sometimes they are, like you said, they go down to the practice squad, they get elevated, but at some point, I do expect he's going to be a contributor to the 53-man roster. I like this take. I think it's very solid. My take is more Hall of Fame game related. And the reason why is I think in my heart of hearts, and I don't get me wrong, I love the fact that he fights the fight against Caleb Williams. But first round mock has probably some of the dumbest quarterback evaluations I've seen. And that's saying a lot for somebody that like stays on Twitter as much as I do. But first round mock is a guy that is just harping on Carson Beck being his quarterback one from this weak draft class. And it's just, I don't know why you would like kind of stake your flag on a guy that's meh at best. And I think Carson Beck comes out in this Hall of Fame game against our secondary. Ejiro Evero might kind of throw a few wrinkles to see if he can catch him lacking. I think Carson Beck throws at least 2 interceptions on Thursday. Maybe to be safer, because I don't know what the drive count's going to look like for Carson Beck and the other Cardinals quarterbacks that may be playing. 2 turnovers, so a fumble and an interception. But I think he puts the ball in harm's way at least twice on Thursday, and I think he has a rough start to his NFL career in the preseason.
I'm looking at the Cardinals depth chart, and Jacoby Brissett's obviously not going to play.
Mm-hmm.
That would leave the other quarterbacks available as Gardner Minshew. Probably, I don't think he would play because he's been in the league for quite some time. And Keaton Slovis, who I believe went undrafted 2 years ago. Former USC, Pitt. He played at a bunch of different schools. Not a super great quarterback. So maybe he ends up playing half the game and Beck plays half the game or something like that. Maybe he gets a quarter and Beck gets 3 quarters. But if Evero's going to throw some stuff at him, I could definitely see Beck turning the ball over quite a bit. It didn't he didn't turn it over a ton at Miami last year, but he also had the Great Wall of China in front of him with his offensive line, and he had a defense that gave him many possessions throughout a game with guys like Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Keontae Scott. And if you recall the national championship, he tried to do what Tua Tagovailoa did to his former Georgia Bulldogs in that overtime game and hit the hole shot to Devontae Smith. He had that lined up, dialed up to his receiver, and just threw a I don't know a pastrami on rye straight to the Indiana defensive back. So he is known to throwing interceptions when he doesn't see the field. And to Evero's credit, if he takes some of these young players and scrambles some looks, I think he can generate a couple turnovers. So I
I,
like this one a lot. I would like to
me,
see multiple turnovers from Carson Beck because I'm not a huge fan of him. I think it would be funny.
I yeah, and that I think it's more for like the meme standpoint. Hopefully, he gives us a couple good memes like Will Levis did a couple years ago. But for me, it's like Zakee Wheatley, Will Lee, Shaw Smith Wade, Lathan Ransom. Like these are guys on the back end that have something to prove. Like we even talked about Corey Thornton kind of establishing himself as like a cornerback three on this team and kind of winning reps away from Shaw Smith Wade like he did last year. It's like these are the games to prove it. Like beat a guy, just clamp him, make Carson Beck feel like he can thread a needle and make him pay. And like you said, you might have a few dying ducks where a safety like Ransom or Wheatley are able to kind of be opportunistic with, and that's all I want to see. I want to see the back end really show what they're worth because I think it's going to be a fair competition in playing some of the backup Arizona Cardinal wide receivers.
I like it. One final note before we get out of here: the Panthers, the wire just came down. We record after 4 o'clock usually, and the transaction wire came through, and we talked about the defensive line battle and depth between guys like Cam Jackson, Lee Hunter, Aaron Hall. We mentioned LeBrian Ray as somebody who's been a reliable rotation piece for the Panthers. They announced his retirement. The Panthers did just a few minutes ago, so he is not someone that'll be competing for a spot this year, but I think that gives more runway for a guy like Aaron Hall to stake his claim, or a guy like Jared Harrison Hunt, who the team were high on last year as an undrafted free agent defensive lineman, to kind of take that spot and run with it. Because with the absence of Turk Wharton and now without LeBrian Ray, there are a couple spots there where defensive linemen can, make a name for themselves for this team. But I think with that, we're going to get out of here. Obviously, watch the Hall of Fame game. It's the first football we've had since February. So, what's that? 6 months, half the year. It's been a long time. I'm excited. And until next week, where we'll talk about that game and then talk about the matchup against Buffalo, I believe is our preseason week one opponent.
We
Until
can call them
then,
the Carolina Panthers 2.0 or the
yeah,
Carolina
Carolina
Panthers of the
North.
Northeast. Yeah.
Yeah, Northeast now because the Giants did have that stint with Gettleman and all the former Panthers. I think Jonathan Stewart ended in as a New York Giant, if I'm not
Yeah, for
mistaken.
a week or two. I don't even think
Yeah.
he played half a season, but I may be wrong on that front.
Regardless, both of those teams, it's mainly Buffalo, but McDermott's not there anymore, so maybe we can cut him a little bit of slack. Nope, Joe Brady is their head coach still. Just remember that. So hopefully we can give them a little bit of revenge next week. But until then, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your content. And as you watch Luke Kuechly get enshrined to the Hall of Fame, I think it's on Friday, right? They do it the day after the game. Remember the motto of the Panthers: keep pounding.